If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Sharing it with your friends and family helps spread knowledge. And when we help others grow, we grow too. Thank you so much for listening. Let's dive into the podcast. Chapter 1, Seeds of Empire, The Making of a Revolutionary Part 1. A boy destined for legends, Chandragupta's mysterious origins. In the dusty villages of Magadha, around 340 BCE, a child was born who would reshape the ancient world. Yet even today, historians debate the true story of Chandragupta Maurya's birth. Some ancient texts claim he came from a royal family fallen on hard times. Others whisper that his mother was a simple village woman who caught the eye of a nobleman. The most persistent legend tells of a peacock trainer's daughter who gave birth to a future emperor. What everyone agrees on is this: Chandragupta entered a world in chaos. Northern India had splintered into dozens of small kingdoms, each fighting the others for scraps of territory and trade routes. The great dynasties that once commanded respect were crumbling from within. Corruption ate away at royal courts like termites in old wood. Kings spent more time counting gold than governing their people. The Nanda dynasty still controlled Magadha, the most powerful kingdom, but their grip was slipping. Common people groaned under heavy taxes while nobles plotted in palace corridors. Trade suffered as merchants feared bandits on unprotected roads. Farmers abandoned their fields when armies trampled their crops season after season. Into this broken world came news that shook every throne. Alexander of Macedonia was marching toward India with an army that had conquered the known world. The young Macedonian had already crushed the mighty Persian Empire. Now his soldiers were crossing mountain passes that led to Indian soil. Chandragupta grew up hearing these stories around cooking fires and in marketplace gossips. He watched local rulers panic as reports arrived of cities falling to the foreign invader. Some kings tried to resist, others offered tribute and submission. All of them seemed small and frightened compared to the legends of this Alexander. The boy absorbed these lessons about power and weakness. He saw how fear could paralyze the mighty and how ordinary people suffered when their leaders failed them. Perhaps most importantly, he witnessed how quickly the established order could crumble when faced with someone bold enough to challenge it. Different versions of his childhood paint different pictures. Some say he played war games with other village children, always insisting on being the king. Others claim he showed unusual intelligence, asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. A few stories describe him as unusually tall and strong, destined for greatness by his very appearance. What seems certain is that Chandragupta's early years shaped a mind that thought differently about power. While other young men dreamed of serving existing kings, he began to imagine something far more ambitious. The fragmented kingdoms around him looked less like permanent fixtures and more like pieces waiting for someone clever enough to fit them together. This was the foundation upon which an empire would rise. Part 2. The Death of a Dynasty. Decline of the Nandas and Magadha in turmoil. The mighty Nanda dynasty that had ruled Magadha for generations was crumbling from within. What had once been the most powerful kingdom in northern India now struggled under the weight of its own excess and corruption. King Dhanananda, the last of his line, sat on a throne that grew shakier with each passing season. The royal treasury, once legendary for its wealth, had become a burden rather than a blessing. Dhanananda's obsession with collecting taxes had turned his subjects against him. Farmers abandoned their fields rather than hand over impossible amounts of grain. Merchants closed their shops and fled to neighboring kingdoms where they could trade without fear of royal seizure. The very wealth that had made the Nandas powerful now poisoned their relationship with everyone they ruled. The king's courtiers whispered behind closed doors about his erratic behavior. Some days he would rage about imaginary threats, ordering arrests of loyal ministers. Other days he would retreat into his palace, refusing to meet with anyone, while urgent matters of state went unresolved. The once efficient administration that had controlled vast territories began to fall apart as confusion spread from the capital to distant provinces. Military commanders who had served the dynasty faithfully for decades started questioning their loyalty. The king's paranoia had led him to execute several popular generals, claiming they plotted against him. This created fear among the remaining officers, who began to wonder if their own heads might roll next. Some quietly reached out to rival kingdoms, testing the waters for better opportunities. Alexander's invasion had shaken the entire region, though the Macedonian armies never reached Magadha directly. The mere knowledge that a foreign force could march so deep into Indian territory had exposed the weakness of the existing order. Local rulers who had once seemed invincible suddenly appeared vulnerable. If the great kingdoms of the Northwest could fall so easily, what protection could any dynasty truly offer? The common people felt this uncertainty most keenly. Trade routes that had operated safely for generations now crawled with bandits and deserters. Without strong central authority, lawlessness spread across the countryside. Villages that had paid taxes to distant kings for protection found themselves abandoned when trouble came calling. Provincial governors, sensing the weakness at the center, began acting like independent rulers. They kept tax revenues for themselves, raised their own armies, and made local alliances without consulting the capital. What had been a unified kingdom slowly fractured into competing power centers, each looking out for its own interests. This chaos created exactly the conditions that ambitious young men like Chandragupta had been waiting for. The old order was collapsing, but nothing had yet risen to replace it. Across northern India, people yearned for strong leadership that could restore peace and prosperity. The question was not whether the Nandas would fall, but who would be bold enough and clever enough to seize the opportunity their weakness presented. Part 3. The mentor arrives, Chanakya's vow and formation of a fateful alliance. In the great University of Takshashila, where scholars from across the known world came to study, lived a man whose sharp mind would reshape the destiny of India. Chanakya, known also as Kautilya, was no ordinary teacher. His dark eyes burned with intelligence, and his tongue could cut through the most complex political problems like a sword through silk. Students feared his harsh questions, but they also knew that no one understood the art of ruling better than this thin, intense Brahmin. Chanakya had spent years watching the Nanda dynasty destroy everything he held sacred. The royal court had insulted him publicly, mocking his appearance and dismissing his wisdom. But the scholar's anger ran deeper than personal pride. He saw how the Nandas had corrupted the ancient laws, how they squeezed taxes from farmers until families starved, how they appointed fools to important positions while ignoring capable men. The very foundations of good government were crumbling under their rule. When news reached Takshashila of a young warrior gathering supporters against the Nandas, Chanakya's interest sparked like dry grass catching fire. He had heard whispers about Chandragupta, this bold youth who dared to challenge the most powerful dynasty in northern India. But could this young man be more than just another rebel doomed to fail? Their first meeting changed both their lives forever. Chandragupta arrived at the university dusty from travel, his clothes simple but his bearing proud. As he spoke of his dreams to free India from weak rulers, Chanakya saw something extraordinary. Here was raw ambition combined with genuine courage, a man who thought not just of personal glory but of creating something greater than himself. The old scholar made a decision that would echo through centuries. He would leave his comfortable life of teaching and join this young rebel. But this would be no ordinary partnership between student and teacher. Chanakya brought something invaluable to their alliance, a complete vision of how to build and rule an empire. Chanakya had spent decades studying every form of government, from the democratic assemblies of ancient republics to the absolute monarchies of distant lands. He understood that winning battles was only the beginning. True power came from creating systems that would endure long after the founder died. He shared with Chandragupta the secrets of statecraft that most rulers never learned: how to organize armies and collect taxes, how to gather intelligence and maintain loyalty, how to balance mercy with firmness. Their partnership grew stronger as they planned together. Chandragupta provided the warrior's instinct and natural leadership that inspired men to follow him into danger. Chanakya offered the scholars patience and strategic thinking that could see 10 moves ahead in the great game of politics. Together, they began to imagine not just the defeat of the Nandas, but the creation of an empire that would bring peace and prosperity to all of India. This alliance between youth and experience, between sword and scroll, would prove to be the foundation upon which the greatest empire in Indian history would rise. Part 4. Shadows of Alexander. India in the wake of Macedonian conquest. The great Macedonian conqueror had come and gone like a thunderstorm, leaving behind a changed world. Alexander's armies had swept through the northwest regions of India, shattering ancient kingdoms and traditional power structures. When the young king died far away in Babylon, his generals carved up his vast empire among themselves, but the effects of his campaign continued to ripple across the Indian subcontinent. In the wake of Alexander's retreat, the political landscape of northwest India lay in ruins. Local rulers who had submitted to the Macedonian king found themselves abandoned, while those who had resisted emerged weakened and suspicious of foreign influence. Greek governors and military commanders remained scattered across the region, controlling strategic cities and trade routes. These foreign administrators brought with them new ways of warfare, governance, and diplomacy that began to influence Indian political thinking. The most significant of these remaining Greeks was Seleucus Nicator, one of Alexander's trusted generals, who claimed vast territories stretching from Syria to the Indus River. His presence in the region created both a threat and an opportunity for ambitious Indian leaders. The Greeks possessed superior military technology, including advanced siege engines and disciplined infantry formations that had proven devastatingly effective against traditional Indian armies. Young Chandragupta observed these developments with keen interest. The sight of foreign rulers controlling Indian territories filled him with both anger and fascination. He studied their methods carefully, learning how they maintained control over diverse populations and adapted their strategies to local conditions. The Greek emphasis on professional armies, systematic administration, and diplomatic alliances offered valuable lessons for someone planning to build an empire. The interaction between Greek and Indian cultures produced unexpected results. Indian rulers began adopting Macedonian military techniques, while Greek administrators learned to work within existing social and religious frameworks. This cultural exchange created new possibilities for political organization and military strategy that had not existed before Alexander's arrival. For Chandragupta and Chanakya, the Greek presence represented both challenge and opportunity. The foreigners controlled key territories that any Indian empire would need to reclaim, but they also provided examples of effective imperial administration. More importantly, the Greeks had demonstrated that traditional Indian military methods could be defeated, creating an urgent need for new approaches to warfare and statecraft. The fragmented political situation created perfect conditions for an ambitious leader to emerge. Local populations yearned for strong leadership that could restore Indian sovereignty while incorporating the best aspects of foreign innovations. The stage was set for someone who could blend traditional Indian values with modern military and administrative techniques. As Chandragupta prepared for his great campaign, he carried with him hard-won knowledge about the wider world beyond India's borders. The encounter with Greek civilization had broadened his vision beyond simple conquest to encompass the creation of a truly modern empire. Soon, he would need to prove that Indian leadership could surpass even the achievements of Alexander's successors. Part 5. A Rebel Awakens. Early Training and First Clashes with Power. Chandragupta knew that dreams of empire meant nothing without the strength to seize them. Under Chanakya's watchful eye, he began the hard work of transforming himself from an ambitious youth into a warrior capable of challenging kings. The training was relentless. Dawn to dusk, he practiced with sword and spear, learning the deadly dance of combat, while Chanakya drilled him in the art of leadership. But weapons alone would not topple the Nandas. Chandragupta needed followers, men willing to risk everything for the promise of change. He found them among the forgotten people of Magadha. Farmers crushed by heavy taxes listened eagerly to his words. Soldiers dismissed from service joined his growing band. Merchants tired of corruption saw opportunity in his rebellion. These early recruits were not polished warriors. They were desperate men with nothing left to lose. Chandragupta molded them into something more dangerous than professional soldiers. He gave them purpose. Under moonless skies, they practiced formations in hidden valleys, They learned to strike fast and disappear before enemy reinforcements arrived. The first test came sooner than expected. A Nanda tax collector named Bhadrasena had been terrorizing villages near the capital, demanding tribute far beyond what the law required. When word reached Chandragupta, he saw his chance. This was no random act of justice. This was calculated rebellion. The attack came at dawn. Chandragupta's men surrounded Bhadrasena's camp while the collector slept. The fight was brief but decisive. Bhadrasena's guards, caught off balance, either fled or died. The collector himself begged for mercy, offering gold for his life. Chandragupta refused. Some battles must be won completely. News of the raid spread like wildfire. The untouchable had struck at the mighty Nandas and drawn blood. Peasants whispered his name in market squares. Young men slipped away from their villages to join his cause. Each victory, no matter how small, proved that the Nandas could be beaten. The response was swift and brutal. Nanda armies scoured the countryside, burning villages suspected of harboring rebels. But Chandragupta had learned from Alexander's tactics. His forces moved like shadows, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. They struck supply lines, ambushed patrols, and vanished into forests the Nanda soldiers feared to enter. With each clash, Chandragupta's reputation grew. He was no longer just another rebel leader destined for a quick death. He was becoming something the Nandas had not faced before, a true threat to their power. Local chieftains began sending secret messages, offering support if he could prove his strength in larger battles. The die was cast. What had begun as scattered raids was transforming into something far more dangerous. Chandragupta had tasted victory and found an army willing to follow him into the fires of war. Soon, the real battle for northern India would begin. Chapter 2. The Age of Upheaval, War, Exile, and the Rise of a Power. Part 1. Seeking Allies, Chandragupta's Encounter with Alexander's Generals. The young prince moved carefully through the fractured territories that Alexander's death had left behind. When the great conqueror died in Babylon, his vast empire began splitting apart like a clay pot dropped from great height. In India, his generals and governors suddenly found themselves ruling distant lands with no clear orders from home. Chandragupta saw opportunity in this chaos. The Macedonian satraps who controlled the northwestern regions were skilled warriors but few in number. They commanded respect through military might, yet they struggled to understand the local people they governed. Many Indian rulers resented these foreign overlords, creating perfect conditions for a clever negotiator. He first approached Paithon, one of Alexander's trusted generals who controlled territories near the Indus River. The meeting took place in a fortified compound where Greek columns stood alongside Indian architectural elements. Chandragupta arrived with a small retinue, presenting himself as a potential ally rather than a threat. He spoke of mutual benefits and shared enemies, particularly the powerful Nanda dynasty that threatened all smaller kingdoms. Paithon studied this ambitious young man carefully. The Greek general had learned to be suspicious of local princes bearing gifts and promises. Yet Chandragupta offered something valuable: detailed knowledge of Indian politics, trade routes, and military capabilities. In exchange, he sought to observe Macedonian military organization and siege techniques. These interactions taught Chandragupta valuable lessons about professional armies. The Greeks maintained strict discipline, used standardized equipment, and employed sophisticated engineering in their campaigns. Their phalanx formations and siege engines were far superior to traditional Indian warfare methods. He absorbed these tactical innovations while maintaining his own cultural identity. Not all encounters were peaceful. When Seleucus, another of Alexander's successors, attempted to reclaim Indian territories, Chandragupta met him with growing confidence. The young prince had spent months building relationships with various tribal chiefs and displaced rulers. His network of allies provided intelligence and support that the isolated Macedonians lacked. The negotiations with these Greek commanders revealed the broader political landscape. Each satrap controlled specific regions but struggled to communicate with neighboring territories. Their divided leadership created gaps that a unified Indian force could exploit. Chandragupta began to see himself not just as another regional player, but as someone who could fill the power vacuum left by Alexander's fragmenting empire. Through careful diplomacy and occasional displays of force, he gained respect from both allies and enemies. Some Macedonian officers even joined his cause, bringing their military expertise to his growing army. These defections weakened Greek control while strengthening Chandragupta's understanding of advanced warfare techniques. The geopolitical chess game was becoming clearer. The Nanda Empire remained the greatest obstacle to his ambitions, but now he possessed both Indian support and Greek military knowledge. The stage was set for the next phase of his campaign, where hard-won experience would face its ultimate test. Part 2. Learning from adversity. Failures, exile, and gathering strength. The early victories had felt promising, but reality struck hard when Chandragupta's forces met their first major defeat. The Nanda armies, seasoned and well-equipped, crushed his smaller force outside a fortified city near the Ganges. His soldiers scattered like leaves in a storm, and Chandragupta barely escaped with his life. The dream of empire seemed to crumble in a single afternoon. Defeat taught harsh lessons. Chandragupta realized he had underestimated his enemies while overestimating his own readiness. The Nanda forces possessed superior numbers, better weapons, and disciplined formations. His own army, though brave, lacked the coordination and experience needed for large-scale warfare. Worse still, his hasty advance had stretched supply lines thin and left little room for retreat. Forced into exile, Chandragupta retreated to the borderlands where he could regroup safely. These months of hiding felt like years. He lived in caves and forest camps, always moving to avoid capture. The constant threat of discovery weighed heavily, but solitude also brought clarity. He studied his mistakes obsessively, replaying every battle decision and analyzing where things had gone wrong. During this dark period, Chandragupta's true character emerged. Lesser men might have abandoned their ambitions, but hardship only strengthened his resolve. He used exile to forge new connections with tribal leaders who had grievances against Nanda rule. These meetings, held in secret around campfires, gradually built a network of supporters who understood his vision for change. The young leader also invested time in learning from his Greek military advisors. They taught him advanced siege techniques, formation tactics, and the importance of logistics. Chandragupta absorbed these lessons eagerly, recognizing that European warfare methods could give him crucial advantages against traditional Indian armies. He began experimenting with combined infantry and cavalry attacks. Slowly, his forces regrouped. Veterans from his earlier campaigns trickled back, bringing stories of Nanda oppression that helped recruit new followers. Chandragupta's reputation for resilience spread among those who opposed the current regime. People began to see him not as a defeated rebel, but as a determined leader who learned from setbacks. The turning point came when Chandragupta successfully defended a small town against a Nanda raid. His improved tactics and better trained soldiers won decisively, capturing valuable supplies and weapons. Word of this victory traveled quickly, attracting more recruits and convincing wavering allies that he could actually challenge the empire. Each subsequent engagement showed Chandragupta's growth as a commander. He avoided direct confrontations with superior forces, instead choosing battles where his mobility and local knowledge provided advantages. These calculated victories rebuilt confidence while demonstrating his evolved strategic thinking. The exile that had seemed like an ending was actually a beginning. Chandragupta emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for the greater challenges ahead. Part 3. Fomenting rebellion. Building an army of outcasts and the dispossessed. Chandragupta knew that victory against the mighty Nanda Empire required more than just skilled tactics and brave commanders. He needed numbers, and those numbers would come from the forgotten corners of society. Across the sprawling territories under Nanda rule, countless people nursed deep grievances against the existing order. The young leader began seeking out those whom the empire had cast aside. Displaced farmers who had lost their lands to heavy taxation flocked to his banner. Merchants ruined by corrupt officials saw him as their chance for justice. Lower caste warriors, denied advancement in the rigid Nanda military hierarchy, found hope in Chandragupta's promise of merit-based promotion. His recruitment went far beyond the discontented citizens. Professional mercenaries, drawn by generous payment and the prospect of rich plunder, joined his growing force. These hardened fighters brought valuable experience from campaigns across distant lands. Former Nanda soldiers, bitter over unpaid wages or harsh treatment, defected with crucial knowledge of imperial military methods. Managing this diverse army presented enormous challenges. Different groups spoke various languages and followed distinct customs. Some came seeking revenge, others wanted wealth, and many simply desired a better life. Chandragupta had to forge unity among people who might naturally distrust each other. He achieved this through careful leadership and shared purpose. Everyone, regardless of background, received equal treatment in training and combat assignments. Merit determined advancement, not birth or previous status. Most importantly, Chandragupta ensured regular pay and fair distribution of captured resources, building loyalty through reliable rewards. The social grievances driving these recruits ran deeper than mere personal dissatisfaction. The Nanda Empire had grown complacent and oppressive over generations. Crushing taxes funded lavish imperial courts, while common people struggled to survive. Justice depended on bribes rather than truth. Officials treated citizens as subjects to exploit rather than people to protect. Chandragupta's growing army became a vehicle for widespread social change. His forces included tribal warriors from forest regions whom the empire had marginalized, skilled artisans seeking economic freedom, and even some sympathetic nobles who recognized the need for reform. This coalition represented a cross-section of society united by common frustration with the status quo. Each successful engagement swelled his ranks further. Word spread that Chandragupta offered genuine opportunity for advancement and treated followers with respect. Entire villages sometimes declared for him after witnessing the discipline and fairness of his soldiers compared to corrupt Nanda troops. The transformation of scattered malcontents into an effective fighting force demonstrated Chandragupta's remarkable leadership abilities. He had created something unprecedented, a revolutionary army that drew strength from society's deepest frustrations while maintaining the cohesion necessary for complex military operations. This diverse coalition would soon test itself against the empire's heartland. Part 4. Lightning across the north, guerrilla campaigns and capturing borderlands. The diverse coalition that Chandragupta had forged now faced its greatest test. Rather than march directly toward the heavily fortified centers of Nanda power, he chose a different path. His forces would strike like lightning across the northern borderlands, using speed and surprise to chip away at enemy control before anyone could mount an effective response. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. While the Nanda armies concentrated around major cities, vast stretches of territory lay protected only by scattered garrisons and local officials. Chandragupta's mobile units could hit these targets, seize supplies, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. Each successful raid not only weakened Nanda control, but also demonstrated to local populations that the empire's grip was loosening. The first targets were frontier posts along the kingdom's edges. These outposts controlled vital trade routes and river crossings that generated enormous wealth for the Nanda treasury. Small teams of Chandragupta's fighters would appear at dawn, overwhelm the surprised defenders, and disappear with weapons, gold, and grain. The captured supplies fed his growing army, while the seized territories provided safe bases for future operations. Word of these lightning strikes spread faster than the Nanda commanders could respond. Garrison after garrison fell to coordinated attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. The rebels had learned to move through forests and hills that regular armies avoided, using local knowledge gained from their diverse recruits. Tribal warriors who knew every hidden path worked alongside former Nanda soldiers who understood enemy tactics. As success bred success, entire regions began shifting allegiance. Local rulers who had chafed under heavy Nanda taxation saw opportunity in these swift victories. They opened their gates to Chandragupta's forces, providing fresh troops and vital intelligence about enemy movements. What had begun as isolated raids transformed into a systematic campaign of territorial conquest. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the military losses. Nanda officials in distant provinces watched helplessly as their authority crumbled. They could not predict where the next attack would come, making every outpost feel vulnerable and isolated. Morale plummeted among troops who realized they were fighting an enemy that could strike anywhere while remaining essentially invisible. Chandragupta himself moved constantly between different fronts, appearing wherever fighting was fiercest. His presence inspired his diverse followers, while his tactical innovations kept enemies off balance. He had mastered the art of making a smaller force appear larger through rapid movement and coordinated strikes across multiple locations. By the time Nanda leaders fully grasped the scope of the threat, vast stretches of their northern territories had fallen under rebel control. The borderlands that once provided security and revenue now served as launching points for deeper penetration into the empire's heart. Chandragupta had demonstrated that unconventional warfare could topple even the mightiest kingdoms, setting the stage for his ultimate assault on the centers of power themselves. Part 5. Laying Siege to an Empire. The epic advance toward Pataliputra. The time had come for the ultimate gamble. Chandragupta stood at the edge of his destiny, staring across the vast plains that stretched toward Pataliputra, the jewel of the Nanda Empire. This magnificent city represented more than just another conquest. It was the beating heart of Indian power, where the Nanda kings had ruled for generations from their towering palaces and vast treasuries. For months, Chandragupta and his advisors had studied every detail about the capital. They mapped the city's walls, counted the guard rotations, and identified which gates saw the heaviest traffic. Spies moved like shadows through Pataliputra's bustling markets, gathering information about food supplies, troop movements, and the mood of the people. The young rebel leader knew that taking this city would require more than military strength. He needed perfect timing and flawless execution. The Nanda army had retreated behind Pataliputra's massive walls after losing the borderlands. King Dhanananda believed his capital's defenses would break Chandragupta's momentum. The walls rose 30 feet high, built from enormous stone blocks that had withstood countless attacks over the centuries. Guard towers dotted the perimeter, bristling with archers and catapults. Inside these walls lived over 500,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the known world. But Chandragupta had learned valuable lessons during his years of warfare. He understood that sieges were won not just through force, but by cutting off supplies and breaking the enemy's will to fight. His army surrounded Pataliputra like a tightening noose, blocking every road and river route that brought food and reinforcements to the city. Merchants who had traveled these paths for decades found their way barred by rebel soldiers. The siege stretched through the hot summer months. Inside the city, grain prices soared as storage warehouses emptied. Citizens who had once lived comfortably began rationing their meals. The Nanda treasury, legendary for its wealth, started paying enormous sums for even basic supplies that managed to slip through the blockade. Chandragupta's patient strategy was slowly strangling the empire's capital. When autumn arrived, Chandragupta finally ordered the assault. His forces had grown even larger as more soldiers abandoned the Nanda cause and joined what now seemed like the winning side. The attack came from multiple directions at once, with siege engines hurling massive stones at the walls while troops stormed the gates. The battle raged for 3 days, filling the air with smoke and the clash of metal against metal. On the third dawn, Pataliputra's great gates finally cracked open. Chandragupta's soldiers poured into the streets as the last Nanda defenders laid down their weapons. King Dhanananda fled through secret tunnels, leaving behind the throne that had defined Indian politics for generations. The rebel who had once been dismissed as a minor threat now stood in the royal palace, master of an empire that stretched across northern India. The fall of Pataliputra sent shockwaves across the subcontinent. Regional kings who had remained neutral suddenly sent envoys offering their submission. Trade routes that had been disrupted by years of warfare could finally reopen under new management. Most importantly, Chandragupta had proven that even the mightiest empires could fall when challenged by someone with vision, patience, and the courage to act decisively. Chapter 3: Conquest of the Heartland, the Fall of the Nandas and Birth of Maurya Rule. Part 1: The Battle for Pataliputra, Defeat of Dhanananda. The massive walls of Pataliputra rose like stone mountains from the earth, their ancient stones bearing witness to centuries of Nanda rule. Behind those walls sat Dhanananda, the last emperor of a dynasty grown fat on the wealth of the Ganges plains. His treasury overflowed with gold, his armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Yet something had changed in the air around his capital. Word had reached him of a young warrior prince gathering forces in the borderlands, backed by the brilliant mind of Chanakya. Chandragupta's army approached the great city not as a raging torrent, but like a careful surgeon preparing for delicate work. Chanakya had studied the Nanda forces for months, mapping their strengths and finding their weaknesses. The old dynasty relied on massive numbers and overwhelming force, but their soldiers fought for pay, not passion. Many had grown soft in peacetime, more accustomed to collecting taxes than facing real battle. The young Mauryan prince positioned his forces with calculated precision. Rather than assault the mighty walls directly, he ordered his men to control the trade routes leading into Pataliputra. Merchants found their caravans turned away. Farmers discovered their grain could not reach the city markets. Within weeks, the great capital began to feel the squeeze of isolation. Dhanananda, watching his empire's lifeblood slowly choke off, made the fatal decision to emerge from his fortress. His massive army poured from the gates like an iron flood, confident that sheer numbers would crush this upstart challenger. The two forces met on the plains outside the city, where the morning sun glinted off thousands of spear points and sword blades. What followed was not the grinding battle of attrition that many expected. Chandragupta's smaller force moved like a dancer, striking hard at specific points while avoiding the enemy's main strength. His cavalry units, trained to work together like fingers of a hand, swept around the flanks of the Nanda formation. When Dhanananda's elephants charged forward, Chandragupta's men scattered like leaves, only to regroup and strike at the war beasts from behind. The turning point came when Chandragupta himself led a desperate charge directly toward Dhanananda's position. His sword flashing in the afternoon light, the young prince cut through the emperor's personal guard like a blade through silk. When Dhanananda fell, his massive army simply melted away. Soldiers who had fought for gold saw no reason to die for a dead paymaster. As news of the victory spread, something remarkable happened across the Ganges Valley. Common people poured from their homes to cheer the conquering army. They had suffered under the Nanda's crushing taxes and arbitrary rule for too long. Here was a young king who promised justice instead of exploitation, order instead of chaos. The ancient gates of Pataliputra swung open without another battle. The greatest city in the known world had fallen, and with it, an entire age had ended. Now came the harder task of building something new from the ruins of the old. Part 2. Ascension of the Emperor. Proclamation of the Mauryan dynasty. The Great Hall of Pataliputra's royal palace had witnessed many ceremonies over the centuries, but none quite like this. On a crisp morning in 321 BCE, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through carved stone windows, 25-year-old Chandragupta Maurya prepared for the moment that would reshape the Indian subcontinent forever. The young conqueror who had toppled the mighty Nandas now faced an even greater challenge, transforming military victory into lasting imperial rule. Chanakya stood beside his protege, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled crowd of nobles, merchants, and regional chieftains who had gathered from across the Ganges Valley. The old Brahmin knew that ceremonies alone would not create an empire. They needed to convince these powerful men that Chandragupta was not just another warlord, but a legitimate ruler worthy of their allegiance. The delicate balance of fear and respect would determine whether the Mauryan dynasty would endure or crumble like so many before it. The coronation ceremony itself blended ancient Vedic traditions with practical political theater. Sacred fires burned as priests chanted hymns that had echoed through royal halls for generations. But Chandragupta's advisors had carefully choreographed every detail to send a clear message. Unlike the isolated Nanda kings who had ruled from behind palace walls, this new emperor would be accessible and just. He wore simple white robes rather than the elaborate golden garments favored by his predecessors, symbolizing his connection to the common people who had welcomed his army. As the crown touched his head, Chandragupta spoke words that would define his reign. He promised to protect the weak, punish the corrupt, and treat all subjects fairly regardless of their birth or wealth. These were not empty phrases. The new emperor had witnessed firsthand how the Nanda's greed and cruelty had alienated their own people. He understood that lasting power came not from fear alone, but from earning the loyalty of those he governed. The real work began immediately after the ceremony ended. Diverse regions across northern India had fallen under Mauryan control, but each retained its own customs, languages, and local rulers. Chandragupta faced the monumental task of creating unity without destroying the very diversity that made these lands prosperous. Some territories had surrendered willingly, hoping for better treatment than they had received under Nanda rule. Others remained suspicious, watching carefully to see if this young emperor would prove different from those who came before. Regional governors and local chiefs arrived in Pataliputra throughout the following weeks, each testing the new ruler's resolve. Some came bearing tribute and pledges of loyalty. Others arrived with barely concealed hostility, probing for signs of weakness they could exploit. Chandragupta received them all with careful diplomacy, demonstrating both strength and restraint. He confirmed capable administrators in their positions, while quietly replacing those who had grown too comfortable with corruption. The proclamation of the Mauryan dynasty represented more than a change of rulers. For the first time in Indian history, a single authority claimed dominion over the vast fertile plains of the north. This moment marked the birth of imperial India, setting precedents that would influence governance for centuries to come. As word of the new emperor spread beyond the Ganges Valley, neighboring kingdoms watched nervously. The rise of Chandragupta Maurya had created something unprecedented, a centralized state powerful enough to challenge any rival. The young emperor had successfully transformed conquest into legitimate rule, but greater challenges awaited as he prepared to expand his authority across the subcontinent. Part 3. Coronation amid ruins. Chanakya as Prime Minister and new governance begins. The Grand Palace at Pataliputra stood battered but not broken. Within its marble halls where Nanda emperors once held court, a new chapter of history was about to begin. Chandragupta Maurya sat on the ancient throne, but the weight of conquest was nothing compared to the burden of rule that now pressed upon his shoulders. The young emperor understood that military victory meant little without the machinery of governance to sustain it. In the shadow of the throne stood Chanakya, the brilliant teacher whose mind had conceived both the conquest and its aftermath. The former professor from Taxila now carried a new title, Prime Minister of the Mauryan Empire. His sharp eyes surveyed the remnants of Nanda administration, seeing opportunity where others saw only destruction. The old system had crumbled under the weight of corruption and incompetence. Now they would build something entirely different. Chanakya wasted no time in implementing the administrative vision he had developed through years of study and planning. Drawing from his vast treatise, the Arthashastra, he began creating a centralized system unlike anything India had ever seen. Where previous kingdoms relied on feudal loyalty and personal relationships, the Mauryan Empire would operate through structured departments and clear chains of command. The new prime minister established ministries for revenue, defense, justice, and trade. Each department received specific responsibilities and reporting structures. Provincial governors would answer directly to the capital, not to local strongmen or hereditary nobles. This radical approach stripped power from traditional elites and placed it firmly in the hands of trained administrators loyal to the crown. Spies and informants became the eyes and ears of the empire. Chanakya organized an extensive intelligence network that monitored everything from market prices to political whispers. This system ensured that problems could be identified and addressed before they threatened stability. Local officials knew they were being watched, which discouraged corruption and encouraged efficiency. The transformation was swift but methodical. Within months, tax collection became more regular and fair. Trade routes received protection from imperial forces. Courts began dispensing justice according to written codes rather than local customs or bribes. The people, long suffering under Nanda misrule, began to see tangible improvements in their daily lives. Chandragupta proved an eager student of statecraft, absorbing Chanakya's lessons while adding his own insights gained from years of struggle. Together, they created a partnership that balanced philosophical wisdom with practical experience. The emperor provided the authority and vision, while his prime minister supplied the intellectual framework and administrative expertise. This new model of governance represented more than mere efficiency. It established the principle that an empire could be held together through systems rather than personality alone. Professional bureaucracy replaced personal favoritism. Written laws superseded arbitrary decisions. The Mauryan administrative structure became a template that would influence Indian governance for generations. As news of these reforms spread throughout the empire, neighboring kingdoms watched with growing concern. The Mauryans were not simply conquering territory. They were creating an entirely new form of state power that could challenge any rival through superior organization and resources. Part 4. Reordering the realm. Early reforms and winning over the masses. The new emperor faced a daunting challenge. Across his vast territories, different peoples spoke different languages, followed different customs, and harbored deep suspicions about their new rulers. The Nanda regime had left behind a legacy of resentment through heavy taxation and harsh treatment of farmers and merchants. Chandragupta understood that military conquest alone would not hold his empire together. His first priority was land reform. Under the Nandas, wealthy nobles had seized enormous estates while small farmers struggled under crushing debts. Chandragupta ordered a systematic redistribution of unused royal lands to landless peasants. He also established clear property rights and reduced the tax burden on agricultural communities. These measures immediately won him support from the rural population, who formed the backbone of his empire. The emperor recognized that trade was the lifeblood of prosperity. He standardized weights and measures across all territories, making commerce easier between distant regions. New roads connected major cities, with rest houses built every few miles for traveling merchants. Chandragupta established state granaries to store surplus grain during good harvests, ensuring food security during famines. These policies transformed the empire from a collection of separate regions into an integrated economic system. Military reform proved equally crucial. Instead of relying on temporary alliances with regional chiefs, Chandragupta created a professional standing army directly loyal to the throne. Soldiers received regular pay and training, making them more effective than the poorly equipped militias of his predecessors. He organized the army into specialized units: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots, each with distinct roles in battle. This military machine could respond quickly to threats anywhere in the empire. Infrastructure projects demonstrated the emperor's commitment to improvement. Teams of workers repaired irrigation canals damaged during years of warfare. New wells provided clean water to villages. Bridges connected communities previously separated by rivers. These practical improvements touched the daily lives of ordinary people, creating tangible proof that Mauryan rule meant progress rather than oppression. Chandragupta also addressed cultural diversity within his empire. Rather than imposing a single set of practices, he allowed local customs to continue while establishing common laws for trade and justice. This tolerance helped different communities accept Mauryan authority without feeling their identities were threatened. The results became apparent within months. Tax revenues increased as agricultural production recovered. Merchants reported fewer bandits on the roads, allowing trade to flourish. Local governors sent reports of decreasing unrest and growing cooperation from regional leaders. The emperor had successfully transformed conquest into acceptance. These reforms created something unprecedented in Indian history: a stable, prosperous empire that served its people rather than merely extracting wealth from them. The foundation was now solid enough to support even greater ambitions. With his heartland secure and his subjects content, Chandragupta could turn his attention outward, where new challenges and opportunities awaited beyond his borders. Chapter 4. Empire Forged in Fire: Expansion, Diplomacy, and the World Stage. Part 1. The Greek Challenge: Confrontation with Seleucus Nicator. After securing northern India, Chandragupta faced his greatest test yet. To the west, across the Indus River, lay territories controlled by Seleucus I Nicator, one of Alexander's most capable generals. When Alexander died, his vast empire split among his successors, and Seleucus claimed the eastern portions, including parts of modern Afghanistan and Pakistan. Seleucus was no ordinary opponent. He had fought alongside Alexander during the conquest of Persia and possessed deep knowledge of Indian warfare from those campaigns. More importantly, he commanded battle-hardened Macedonian troops and controlled strategic trade routes that connected India to the Mediterranean world. For Chandragupta, these western territories represented more than land. They were the gateway to immense wealth and international recognition. The tension began when both rulers eyed the same prize. Seleucus needed resources to fund his ongoing wars against other Greek successors, while Chandragupta required secure western borders to protect his growing empire. Neither man could afford to appear weak before their respective armies and allies. The first clashes came around 305 BCE along the Indus frontier. Seleucus crossed into Indian territory with confidence, expecting to replicate Alexander's earlier successes. However, he encountered an entirely different situation. Unlike the fragmented kingdoms Alexander had faced, Chandragupta commanded a unified empire with vast resources and battle-tested troops. The Mauryan forces proved formidable. Chandragupta's army included thousands of war elephants, creatures that still struck terror into foreign troops, despite their experience during Alexander's campaigns. His infantry formations, trained in both Indian and Greek tactics, moved with discipline across familiar terrain. Most crucially, Chandragupta fought on home ground with secure supply lines stretching back to the wealthy Ganges Valley. Seleucus quickly realized this campaign differed from his previous conquests. His troops, veterans though they were, found themselves fighting an enemy that matched their organization while vastly outnumbering them. The Indian climate, logistics challenges, and constant pressure from Mauryan forces began taking their toll on the Greek army. Both leaders were pragmatists who recognized a stalemate when they saw one. Continued fighting would drain resources both needed elsewhere. Seleucus faced threats from other successor kingdoms in the west, while Chandragupta still had southern Indian territories to conquer. Neither could afford a prolonged conflict that might leave them vulnerable to other enemies. What happened next would reshape the political landscape of the ancient world. Instead of fighting to mutual destruction, these two formidable rulers chose negotiation over endless warfare. Their decision would create one of the most significant diplomatic agreements in ancient history, establishing Chandragupta as an equal player on the international stage, while securing Seleucus the resources he desperately needed for his western campaigns. Part 2. Battle and Bargain. The Treaty with Seleucus and the Elephant Exchange. The treaty negotiations began in earnest as both armies faced each other across the dusty plains of northwest India. Chandragupta and Seleucus met not as conquerors seeking total victory, but as pragmatic rulers who understood the value of compromise. The young Mauryan emperor had proven his military strength, while the Greek general recognized that these lands would be costly to hold against a determined local ruler. The terms they hammered out would surprise many. Chandragupta received vast territories that stretched his empire westward to modern-day Afghanistan. These lands included the rich provinces of Arachosia, Gedrosia, and parts of Arya. In return, Seleucus would receive something far more valuable than gold or silver. 500 war elephants would march west to join his armies. These were not ordinary animals. Indian war elephants were the ancient world's equivalent of modern tanks. Standing over 10 feet tall, trained for battle, and capable of crushing enemy formations, they represented the ultimate military technology of their time. Each elephant required years of training and cost a fortune to maintain. For Seleucus, they offered a decisive advantage against his rivals in the Mediterranean world. The Elephant Exchange revealed Chandragupta's strategic brilliance. He traded animals he could replace for territories he could govern permanently. The Mauryan emperor understood that controlling trade routes through Afghanistan would bring wealth for generations. Meanwhile, Seleucus gained immediate military power he desperately needed for upcoming battles against other Greek kingdoms. Both rulers sealed their agreement with personal bonds. Seleucus gave his daughter in marriage to Chandragupta, creating a family connection between their dynasties. This marriage alliance ensured that future disputes could be resolved through family negotiations rather than warfare. The Greek general also sent ambassadors to live permanently at the Mauryan court, establishing formal diplomatic relations. The treaty transformed the political landscape of Asia. For the first time, an Indian ruler had negotiated as an equal with the successors of Alexander the Great. Chandragupta had gained international recognition and expanded his empire without devastating losses. The elephant corps that marched west with Seleucus would later help him win crucial battles, proving the wisdom of both rulers' decisions. News of the agreement spread quickly across the ancient world. Other kingdoms realized that a new power had emerged in the east. The Mauryan Empire was no longer a regional force but a major player in international politics. Chandragupta had achieved something remarkable by combining military strength with diplomatic skill. He had secured his western borders while establishing profitable relationships with the Greek world. This treaty would influence Indian politics for centuries, showing future rulers the power of negotiation backed by strength. Part 3. Forging alliances, marriage pacts, embassies, and cultural exchange. The success of the Seleucus Treaty opened new possibilities for Chandragupta. Word of his diplomatic skills spread across the ancient world, and neighboring kingdoms began approaching Pataliputra with offers of friendship. The emperor understood that lasting peace required more than signed agreements. He needed to weave together a network of relationships that would bind distant rulers to his empire through family ties and shared interests. Marriage became Chandragupta's most powerful diplomatic tool. Following ancient tradition, he arranged marriages between Mauryan princes and princesses with the children of allied kings. These unions created bonds that went beyond political convenience. When a Tamil princess married into the Mauryan royal family, her wedding procession brought skilled artisans, exotic spices, and new technologies to Pataliputra. The couple's children would inherit claims to both kingdoms, making future wars between these realms nearly impossible. The emperor also sent carefully chosen ambassadors to courts across Asia. These weren't simple messengers, but cultured nobles who could speak multiple languages and understand foreign customs. A Mauryan embassy to the kingdoms of Central Asia carried gifts of fine silk, precious gems, and detailed maps showing safe trade routes. In return, they brought back knowledge of new farming techniques and military innovations. These diplomatic missions sparked remarkable cultural exchanges. Greek architects arrived in Pataliputra to design new palaces, blending Hellenistic columns with Indian stone carving traditions. Persian scholars established schools that taught both Sanskrit and Aramaic. Chinese traders brought porcelain and paper-making secrets, while Indian mathematicians shared their knowledge of zero and decimal systems with foreign visitors. The marriages and embassies created a web of obligations and opportunities. When drought struck an allied kingdom, Mauryan grain ships arrived within weeks. When bandits threatened trade routes, combined armies from multiple kingdoms restored order. These partnerships made the Mauryan Empire the center of a vast network stretching from the Mediterranean to Southeast Asia. Cultural exchange flowed both ways through these diplomatic channels. Indian musicians learned to play Greek lyres while Greek scholars studied Buddhist philosophy. New artistic styles emerged as craftsmen from different traditions worked side by side. The famous Mauryan pillars began incorporating design elements from Persia, Greece, and local Indian traditions, creating a unique imperial style. These alliances proved their worth during times of crisis. When rebellions erupted in distant provinces, allied kingdoms provided troops and supplies. When natural disasters struck, the network of relationships ensured rapid assistance. The empire's strength no longer depended solely on its own armies, but on the collective power of its diplomatic partners. Through marriage pacts and cultural exchanges, Chandragupta had transformed the Mauryan Empire from a military conquest into a civilizational force. His approach would influence how future Indian rulers managed their relationships with foreign powers, proving that lasting empires were built on shared interests rather than fear alone. Part 4. Organizing a superstate. Military might and civil administration. The network of alliances Chandragupta had carefully constructed through marriage and diplomacy created a foundation of trust, but trust alone could not govern an empire stretching from the Hindu Kush to the Bay of Bengal. The emperor understood that lasting power required more than diplomatic partnerships. It demanded a system that could function efficiently across vast distances, collect taxes from millions of subjects, and deploy military force when needed. The bureaucracy that emerged from Chandragupta's vision resembled a vast machine with interconnected parts. At its heart sat the emperor himself, but below him spread layers of officials who managed everything from tax collection to road maintenance. Provincial governors oversaw large territories, while district magistrates handled local affairs. Each official reported to those above them, creating a chain of command that stretched from remote villages to the palace in Pataliputra. This administrative network relied on detailed record-keeping that would impress modern governments. Scribes maintained registers of population, land ownership, and tax obligations in every district. Trade routes were mapped and monitored, with officials tracking the movement of merchants and goods. The empire's financial health depended on accurate information flowing upward through these channels, allowing central planners to make informed decisions about resource allocation and military deployment. The legal system that supported this bureaucracy represented a revolutionary approach to governance. Rather than relying on local customs that varied from region to region, Chandragupta's advisors codified uniform laws that applied throughout the empire. These regulations covered everything from commercial disputes to criminal penalties, ensuring that a merchant traveling from one end of the empire to the other faced consistent legal standards. Military organization paralleled the civilian bureaucracy in its sophistication. The Mauryan army consisted of professional soldiers rather than seasonal levies of farmers. These troops received regular pay, standardized equipment, and systematic training. Infantry formations practiced coordinated movements, while cavalry units learned to work in harmony with war elephants. The army's structure allowed for rapid deployment to trouble spots while maintaining permanent garrisons in strategic locations. The standing army's composition reflected the empire's diverse population. Soldiers came from various regions and backgrounds, creating units that understood local conditions while serving imperial interests. This diversity proved valuable when rebellions erupted or external threats emerged, as commanders could deploy troops familiar with specific territories and cultures. Revenue collection powered this entire system through a network of tax officials who assessed and gathered payments from agricultural lands, trade activities, and craft production. The empire's prosperity attracted merchants and artisans, whose economic activities generated additional income for the state treasury. This wealth funded not only military operations but also public works projects that improved infrastructure and demonstrated imperial power. The organizational innovations Chandragupta implemented created a template for governance that would influence Indian political development for centuries. His system proved that large, diverse populations could be effectively administered through professional bureaucracy and uniform laws, while military might ensured compliance and security. These foundations would soon face their greatest test when foreign observers arrived to document the empire's achievements. Part 5. Megasthenes in Pataliputra, chronicling the empire's grandeur. Around 302 BCE, a Greek diplomat named Megasthenes arrived at the gates of Pataliputra, carrying credentials from Seleucus I Nicator. This was no ordinary diplomatic mission. Megasthenes came as an ambassador to establish permanent relations between the Greek kingdoms and Chandragupta's empire. His arrival marked the first systematic attempt by a Western power to understand the inner workings of this vast Indian superstate. The journey to Pataliputra itself amazed Megasthenes. He traveled through well-maintained roads protected by imperial guards, past prosperous villages and bustling trade centers. When he finally reached the capital, the sight took his breath away. Pataliputra stretched along the Ganges River for miles, its massive wooden walls dotted with watchtowers and gates. The city housed over 500,000 people, making it one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world. Inside the royal palace complex, Megasthenes witnessed luxury beyond Greek imagination. The buildings featured intricate wooden architecture adorned with gold and precious stones. Gardens filled with exotic plants surrounded reflecting pools where peacocks roamed freely. The throne room itself sparkled with precious metals and gems, designed to overwhelm visitors with imperial power. What impressed Megasthenes most was not the wealth but the organization. He observed a sophisticated administrative system where officials maintained detailed records of everything from tax collection to military recruitment. The palace hummed with activity as scribes recorded legal decisions, ministers reviewed provincial reports, and messengers carried orders across the empire. This level of bureaucratic efficiency surpassed anything in the Greek world. Megasthenes documented the daily routines of imperial life. He watched Chandragupta conduct court sessions where citizens could petition directly to their emperor. He observed the complex protocols governing palace life, from the tasting of food to the changing of guards. The emperor's personal security fascinated him. Dozens of female bodyguards protected Chandragupta, while poison testers checked every meal. The Greek ambassador spent years in Pataliputra, learning Sanskrit and studying Indian customs. He interviewed court officials, merchants, and scholars, gathering information about laws, religions, and social practices. His writings described everything from Indian military tactics to agricultural methods, creating the most comprehensive Western account of ancient India. These observations would prove invaluable for future generations. Megasthenes' detailed descriptions provided evidence of the Mauryan Empire's remarkable achievements in governance, architecture, and social organization. His accounts influenced Greek and Roman understanding of India for centuries, painting a picture of a civilization that matched or exceeded their own accomplishments. When Megasthenes eventually returned to the Greek world, he carried with him not just diplomatic agreements, but a treasure trove of knowledge. His writings would become the foundation for Western scholarship about ancient India, ensuring that Chandragupta's achievements reached audiences far beyond the subcontinent's borders. Chapter 5: Twilight and Legacy, the Philosopher King and the Aftermath. Signs of restlessness, abdication, and spiritual awakening. After decades of absolute power, the great emperor began to change. Those who served in the palace noticed it first. Chandragupta would sit for hours in silence, staring beyond the marble walls that had once been his entire world. The man who had conquered kingdoms now seemed troubled by something far deeper than military campaigns or political intrigue. The weight of ruling such a vast empire had always been enormous. Every day brought decisions that affected millions of lives. Wars to fight, taxes to collect, justice to dispense. The machinery of power never stopped. But something had shifted inside the emperor's mind. The victories that once brought joy now felt hollow. The ceremonies that once filled him with pride seemed meaningless. Ancient texts suggest that Chandragupta began questioning the very nature of power itself. What was the point of controlling so much territory if the soul remained restless? The emperor, who had everything, found himself asking whether he truly had anything at all. Palace advisors whispered about his strange new habits, long periods of fasting, conversations with wandering holy men, and hours spent in contemplation. The influence of Jain teachers grew stronger during these years. These monks spoke of a different kind of strength, the power that came from giving up worldly desires rather than pursuing them. Their message resonated with a ruler who had achieved every earthly goal, yet felt increasingly empty. The contrast was striking. Here was a man who commanded armies, yet he envied the peace of those who owned nothing. Chandragupta's behavior became more erratic. He would cancel important meetings to walk alone in the gardens. Foreign ambassadors found themselves waiting days to see an emperor who seemed more interested in philosophical discussions than state affairs. The bureaucracy that had once run so smoothly began to show signs of strain without its driving force. The turning point came gradually, then suddenly. One morning, palace officials discovered that Chandragupta had made his decision. He would leave the throne to his son Bindusara and abandon royal life entirely. The announcement shocked the court, but those closest to him had seen it coming for months. This was not a typical succession. Most rulers died in office or were forced out by enemies. Chandragupta was choosing to walk away from absolute power while still in his prime. He stripped himself of royal robes, dismissed his bodyguards, and prepared to become what he had long admired, a simple seeker of truth. The emperor's transformation into a spiritual seeker would set a powerful precedent. It showed that even the mightiest rulers could recognize something greater than political authority. As Chandragupta prepared for his final journey, the empire he had built stood ready to continue without him, while he embarked on a very different kind of conquest. Part 2. The Path of the Jain Monk, Final Years at Shravanabelagola. The former emperor walked slowly through the dusty roads of Karnataka, his bare feet touching the same earth that had once bowed to his authority. Chandragupta had traded his golden throne for a simple brown robe, his crown for a shaved head. The man who had commanded millions now owned nothing but the cloth on his back. He was not alone on this journey. Bhadrabahu, the respected Jain teacher, walked beside him. The old monk had seen something in the emperor that went beyond political ambition. For months, Bhadrabahu had guided Chandragupta through the principles of Jainism, the belief in nonviolence, the rejection of material possessions, and the pursuit of spiritual freedom through self-discipline. The hills of Shravanabelagola rose before them like ancient guardians. This sacred site had drawn holy men for generations. Here, carved into the rock itself, stood massive statues of Jain saints who had achieved liberation from earthly desires. The place seemed perfect for what Chandragupta intended to do. Local villagers watched in amazement as the former emperor settled into a simple cave. Word spread quickly through the region. The man who had built an empire stretching from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal now spent his days in silent meditation. He ate only what was offered to him, and on many days he ate nothing at all. This transformation puzzled many people. How could someone willingly give up such power? In most cultures, rulers clung to their thrones until death forced them away. Yet here was Chandragupta, demonstrating that true strength might lie in letting go rather than holding on. The emperor's daily routine became remarkably simple. He rose before dawn, meditated as the sun painted the hills golden, and spent hours studying Jain teachings. He practiced ahimsa, the principle of causing no harm to any living being. The same hands that had once signed orders for military campaigns now moved gently to avoid disturbing even the smallest insects. Years passed quietly in this manner. Chandragupta grew thinner, his face more weathered, but those who visited him noticed a deep peace in his eyes. He had found something that his vast empire could never provide, contentment that came from within, rather than from external achievements. When famine struck the region, the former emperor made his final choice. Following Jain tradition, he began a fast unto death, believing this voluntary departure from life represented the ultimate act of spiritual devotion. As his body weakened, his spirit seemed to grow stronger. Chandragupta's death marked more than the end of one man's life. It created a powerful symbol that would influence Indian culture for centuries. Here was proof that worldly success and spiritual fulfillment could coexist, that the highest achievement might be knowing when to walk away from achievement itself. Part 3. Bindusara and Beyond. The Mauryan line continues. When Chandragupta chose the path of spiritual renunciation, he faced a crucial decision about his empire's future. The vast territories he had conquered and the administrative systems he had built could not simply be abandoned. His son Bindusara, already seasoned in governance, stepped forward to carry the imperial burden. Bindusara received an empire at its peak strength. The military machine remained formidable. The treasury was full, and the administrative network stretched across most of the Indian subcontinent. Yet inheriting such power came with enormous pressure. Citizens, nobles, and regional governors all watched to see if this new ruler could match his legendary father's achievements. The young emperor proved himself worthy of the inheritance. Where Chandragupta had focused on conquest and consolidation, Bindusara turned his attention to expansion and refinement. He pushed the empire's boundaries further south, bringing more of the Deccan Plateau under Mauryan control. His armies moved with the same efficiency that had marked his father's campaigns, but now they fought to expand rather than simply defend. Bindusara's greatest challenge lay not in military campaigns, but in maintaining the delicate balance his father had created. The empire contained dozens of different peoples, languages, and local customs. Each region required careful handling to prevent rebellion. Bindusara learned to blend firmness with flexibility, using both force and diplomacy to keep his vast territories united. The administrative systems Chandragupta had established became Bindusara's greatest asset. The network of spies, tax collectors, and regional governors continued to function smoothly. Trade routes remained secure, allowing wealth to flow into the imperial treasury. This steady income funded further military expeditions and grand building projects that demonstrated Mauryan power. Foreign relations also demanded attention. Greek kingdoms still controlled territories in the northwest, while southern kingdoms eyed Mauryan expansion with suspicion. Bindusara maintained his father's policy of strategic alliances while keeping military pressure on potential enemies. He understood that diplomacy and warfare were two sides of the same coin. Perhaps most importantly, Bindusara had to govern without his father's guiding presence. Chandragupta's decision to become a monk meant losing access to decades of hard-won experience. The new emperor had to develop his own style of leadership while respecting the foundations his father had laid. The empire continued to prosper under Bindusara's rule, but seeds of future challenges were already visible. The sheer size of the Mauryan domains made central control increasingly difficult. Regional governors grew more independent, and maintaining loyalty across such distances required constant vigilance. These problems would eventually test the limits of the system Chandragupta had created. Bindusara's reign proved that Chandragupta's empire was more than one man's personal achievement. The institutions, traditions, and governing philosophy he established had created something that could survive his departure. The Mauryan dynasty would continue to shape Indian history for generations, carrying forward the vision of unified rule that began with a young exile's daring ambition. Part 4. Building on Foundations, Lasting Institutions and Imperial Memory. The seeds of Chandragupta's administrative genius grew into towering trees that provided shade for centuries of Indian rulers. His district-based governing system became the blueprint for every major empire that followed. The Guptas, the Mughals, and even British colonial administrators borrowed heavily from the Mauryan model of centralized authority, balanced with local flexibility. The revenue collection methods he pioneered continued for over 2,000 years. His land surveys, tax assessments, and record-keeping practices formed the backbone of Indian administration. Future emperors modified the details but kept the basic structure intact. Even today, India's administrative divisions echo patterns first established in Chandragupta's time. His approach to religious tolerance created a lasting tradition in Indian governance. Unlike many ancient rulers who imposed their beliefs, Chandragupta showed that effective leadership required respecting diverse faiths. This principle influenced Ashoka's famous edicts and became a defining characteristic of successful Indian empires. The idea that a strong ruler could govern multiple communities without forcing uniform beliefs became deeply embedded in Indian political thought. The Arthashastra's influence extended far beyond military strategy. Its detailed guidance on diplomacy, economics, and statecraft became required reading for generations of administrators. Medieval Indian courts studied its principles, and modern scholars still find relevant insights in its pages. The text represents one of the earliest comprehensive guides to running a complex state. Cultural memory transformed Chandragupta from historical figure to legendary founder. Sanskrit literature portrayed him as the ideal king who balanced power with wisdom. Regional traditions across India claimed connections to his dynasty. Folk tales spread his story to villages where people had never heard of written history, keeping his name alive in popular consciousness. His economic policies created lasting prosperity that enabled artistic and intellectual flourishing. The wealth generated by his trade networks and agricultural reforms provided resources for future cultural achievements. The stability he established allowed literature, art, and philosophy to develop without constant disruption from warfare and chaos. Modern historians recognize Chandragupta as the architect of India's first truly national government. Before him, the subcontinent was a collection of competing kingdoms. After him, the concept of unified Indian rule became a recurring theme in political history. Every subsequent attempt at continental empire looked back to the Mauryan precedent. The institutions he created proved remarkably durable. While dynasties rose and fell, the basic administrative framework persisted. His vision of professional bureaucracy, Standardized laws and systematic governance became the foundation upon which Indian civilization built its future. The young exile who challenged the Nandas had transformed himself into something far greater than a conqueror. He became the father of Indian statecraft, whose influence shaped the subcontinent long after his mountain retreat became a place of pilgrimage.